Colt Express is a program movement game. It's not a mechanic that is used in a lot of games, but there's definitely one game that is famous for it, which is Roborally, which is a game that I hate. I loathe it. I can't tell you how much I don't like playing Roborally. Is it a bad game? No. Am I a bad player? Oh yeah, I'm the worst player on earth. I just can't wrap my mind around Roborally, and I know the rules, I just can't do anything with them. In Roborally, if you don't know the game, you have robots that are rallying, and they need to go through certain parkour, so to speak, and you program their movement in advance by playing cards that will then determine where the robots go. But the fact that they may interact with each other, they may shoot at each other, they may get in each other's way, makes it very hard. And I played the game a couple of times and I simply ended up feeling miserable with my robot stuck, completely unable to do anything, other players being annoyed because it still took me a lot of time to program the cards that will allow me to still do nothing. Not a good experience. Colt Express, so it's based on a similar mechanic, so one that I don't explore very often. But this time, for whatever reason, I decided that I wanted to give it a try. Why? Because the game was eye-catching. I saw it being played at Origins 2015 and it looks beautiful. Maybe overproduced, but definitely it is overproduction that catches the eye. That looks great. The components tend to look like toys almost. They could have been produced in a much more basic and minimalistic way, but clearly here they decided to go all the way with a game that looks great, that looks exciting. The theme also seemed to be pretty exciting, which is outlaws in the Far West. The players here take on the role of outlaws that are assaulting a train and they are robbing the passengers, trying to steal some good amount of money from the marshal. But it is not honor among thieves situation, because this is a competitive game in which actually the outlaws are trying to escape from the marshal and they are punching and shooting at each other all the time. Definitely very confrontational. They may even try to steal from one another. So let me show you how the game works. Each player in this game receives a character. The character comes with a board with an icon that is a reminder of the special ability of the character, and then you have some cards here. There's a single card with the image, illustration of the name and the name of the character. It is simply used to flip it to the other side at the end of the game if you scored the bonus for being the best gunslinger in the game. There is a deck of 5 cards representing the bullets that you still have in your gun. So as you can see, you put them in order, and when you shoot a bullet, when you fire a gun, you remove a card to indicate how many you still have and how many you have used. In this game, the more you shoot, the better. You don't need to be too conservative. And then, super important, you have a deck of action cards. So characters may have different abilities, but they all have a deck of same action cards that are exactly the same mix of cards. When you set up the game, you take some of these turn cards. The number on the back of the cards will tell you which cards you use, which will change based on the number of players. For example, suppose we're setting up the game for 4 players, so we use these cards. We shuffle this deck here, we draw 4 cards, and then we take this other set of 3 cards, the stop cards, we draw one random and we put it at the bottom, so that we have a deck of 5 turn cards, 4 regular ones and a stop card, and these cards will regulate actions during the turn. You also see these items here, which are just for chrome and fun. They really have no function in the game. You have your character, the turn deck is ready. But then, of course, look what we have there. Of course, a real eye catcher, which is the train, which is the quote-unquote board where the game is played. It is made of different cars. There's also locomotive, but it is made of different cars. One per player, that's the number of cars that you have. Each car has 2 floors, basically an inside of the car and the roof. At the beginning of the game, when you're setting up the game, you place loot tokens in the cars, and loot tokens may be bags, a purchase of money, diamonds representing jewelry that you're stealing from the passengers, and also in the locomotive there is a save here that is particularly valuable, but also there is the marshal, which is a non-playing piece, not controlled by a player, that will go around and will harass the players and will make stuff harder for them. Just look at how cool these cards are. I'm usually not a big fan of overproduced games, and this one is probably overproduced, but I just find it so cool, so immensely cool. At the beginning of the game, the players start from the last 2 cards of the train, and when you're ready to go, you flip the first card from this deck here, which tells you the actual number of turns that this round will last, and if there are special actions that need to be resolved, if any. Actually, we use this card here because I think it's more interesting. The number of boxes here tells you the number of rounds that you have. In this case, we'll have 4. This icon here tells us that in that round, the cards will be played face down. In every round, the players will play a card, or they can alternately choose to draw 3 cards instead. But some cards, usually cards are played face up, and in these turns here, when the train is going through a tunnel, actually they're placed face down. Here we have 3 rounds, but in one, players will take 2 actions consecutively. Things like this. Also, there are icons indicating other actions that may need to be resolved at the end of the turn that you're playing. Now, as I said, each player has a deck of 10 action cards. You shuffle them at the beginning of each turn, and you draw 6 to form your present hand of cards. Then players will alternate going around the table and playing a card each from their hand to form a common deck of cards, of action cards. Suppose, for example, here we are in round 1, the one indicated by that little empty box there. I decide to play this card here, and I place it here face up. Everybody plays a card, and in doing so, players will simply place the card that they have just played on top of mine. So we will have a deck in which cards alternate. Of course, there may be cases when a player has passed, meaning hasn't drawn cards, so the rhythm, the configuration of the common deck will be a little different, but this is certainly the general idea. The players add cards there, and at the end, the deck will look a little bit like something like this. Remember, however, rewind the time with the power of imagination. In this case, we're back at the end of round 1. The players have played their cards. Round 2, now players are playing cards face down, so they do not know what the opponent is playing. And then we go round 3 and round 4. Done. When all players have played the cards that apply to the present number of rounds in the present turn, you take the deck and you flip it face up, you flip it like this, and you start resolving cards. This is to ensure the cards are resolved in the same order in which they were played. These ones were played earlier, now they are resolved earlier. So you simply flip a card, and it resolves the action. The corresponding character will perform the action indicated by the illustration and by the icon. In this case, for example, Belle, that starts there, will move by one card on the floor in which she is. If she is inside, she will move inside the train. If she's on top, she will move on top. Actually, if she is inside, she moves by one. If she is on top of the roof, which is a valid legal area to be in, she moves faster. She can move up to 3 cars. And this is really the general idea. You flip cards and you resolve what it is that they do. Django also moves. Here, interesting thing, Belle can shoot. Suppose that she is here now. And she can shoot a character belonging to another player that is in an adjacent card if she's inside. If she's on the roof, she can shoot another character on the roof up to 3 cars away, as long as there's a line of sight, which simply means there aren't other characters, other meeples in the way. She has to fire the first target that her line of sight, her trajectory will encounter. When you shoot an opponent, you inflict them some damage. So you take a card from this deck here, from your own deck, and you place it in their own deck, which simply means that this card, which is useless to them, will clutter their hand and will make their deck less effective. Other actions, so we talked about shooting, talked about moving. The Marshal, with this action you can move the Marshal by 1 space. The Marshal always stays inside the train to protect the passengers, and the Marshal cannot be in the same space with an outlaw. If the Marshal enters that space, the outlaw immediately has to jump on the roof of the train, and that player also, the character also receives a bullet card from the neutral deck, the one that represents the bullets that are used by the Marshal. Other actions, you can loot. That is, if you are in an area that has loot tokens, then you simply grab one, and the loot tokens have different values, which is printed at the bottom on the other side of the token, indicating them. Punching is a powerful action. You can perform it if you are in the same space as another character. You target that character. First, the character drops a loot token, if they have any, and then the character is projected away. It's very spectacular, very Tarantino movie-like, very over-the-top action movies. You punch somebody and the person flies to the next card. And of course, since there are 2 floors, we also need to have a look at the floor change, which allows you to go from the inside of the car to the roof, and vice versa. So you do have to resolve all of your actions at the best of your possibilities, if they are possible at all. The outlaws cannot leave the trains. So actually, if you have an action that will force you to go off the caboose or off the locomotive, then you simply don't resolve it. But you do have to try to resolve all possible actions. As I said, there are actions that may need to be resolved at the end of a turn when you have resolved all the rounds. In this case, for example, this icon means that all of the characters on the roof will jump back to the caboose, to the end of the train. Different cards will have different effects or simply no effect in that phase. You repeat the procedure for all turns. Flip a card that tells you the number of rounds and the type. Play the cards in a common stack, resolve them one by one, resolve the actions, perform the actions until the end of the game, which is when you resolve the last card. When you resolve the last card at that point, you see who is the richest outlaw, thanks to the loot that has been collected. Also, the player that has shot the most, that fired more bullets, becomes the official best gunslinger on the train and earns a bonus, a reward of $1,000. I don't know exactly who to be paying this reward, but there is a reward for shooting a lot. And if an action you can't perform, then you can't perform. If you have the shoot action but you have no valid target, then you're not shooting in the air, because that would make it easy for you to waste all of your cards, all of your bullet cards. So at the end, between the loot collected and the gunslinger bonus, the richest player will be the winner of the game. Yes, I liked it. Yes, I liked it. Finally, a game with program movement which I can actually play, which is not nearly as complex as Roborally to wrap your mind around, and it's not a matter of complexity of the rules, simple complexity of the execution. The map, the board, in this case, on top of looking incredibly attractive, also is much simpler. You have less spaces in which you can move, less spaces in which you can get lost, less spaces in which you can get stuck. In Roborally, you have a lot of those. So here, you're always at the center of the action. Even if you mess up, even if you make a mistake, you're not too far usually from some loot marker, from another player that you can mess with. Actually, just by looking at the mechanics, if anything, I was afraid there's going to be too much of a shift to the opposite side of the spectrum, that is too obvious. If it just becomes too obvious, too predictable, then why don't we just take a move and take an action every time? Why do we have to program? Because actually, by committing to actions, there are a couple of interesting situations that may arise. The opponent may punch you, and that moves you in areas where you don't want to be. There may be a chain of actions that you had already programmed and that you're forced to follow after the opponent's moved you, and then you end up jumping from the roof into a car exactly where the marshal is. Happened to me. So I'm still fairly bad. Let's be clear. I'm not a proficient gamer. It's just a mechanic that I have trouble absorbing. But I am not as bad as with Roborally, not nearly. And actually, while I'm still a mediocre player at the best, I actually enjoy the experience much more, because it's less cerebral, gives me less of a headache, less options, are easier for me to manage, but at the same time there are still subtleties and nuances and fun options. The theme is really great, and it really is so much about the interaction among the players. The train does feel claustrophobic. One of the spaces will always be occupied by the marshal, and you don't want to mess with that space. As I said, even if you end up being not where you want to be, you will still be somehow, somewhat in the center of the action. You will not find yourself completely exiled from the main part of the game. This being said, the game is not long, which can be a little bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, a game this simple, this easy, this light, it is perfectly fine that if it doesn't last too long. There is the thinking part in which you're scheming and preparing the common deck of cards, in which you're assessing what the players are doing. You're trying to figure out where they're going to go next, and some bluffing may occur there. With the face down cards, things are even more interesting, because then at that point, you have to try to see where the opponents may be going. If they're ambushing you, if they're trying to attack you, steal stuff from you, there are all these subtleties. So that part takes a little longer, but the game remains simple enough not to be cause of analysis paralysis, usually, I guess. At least that was my experience with the game. What happens in other groups, I know not. So the game doesn't last too long, but at the same time, you really do not have all that many actions. So actually, if you do make one or two or last 3 mistakes, you do not find yourself far from the action. You can still try to score points by shooting the opponents, by becoming the gunslinger. You may still try to catch up, but it does become harder. The game can be, at least in my experience, a little bit punishing if you make 1 or 2 mistakes. There is that possibility, but at least at the beginning, there is a possibility that some mistakes will actually reverberate on the overall architecture of the experience quite a bit, and some players may have trouble there. Going from proficient players that have figured out the game to truly proficient games that know how to play the game well. I myself am still embark on that journey, which I definitely have not completed. But even if that is the case, even if you're not that good, just put in the simplest possible terms, the game really is still short enough. It's not a filler, is longer than that, is meatier, but you'll play it in under an hour. Definitely is considerably less also if the players are familiar with the game, which is just about right. It's just about right, so that's the entire mechanic of programming, which, let's face it, is pretty abstract, it's pretty artificial, does not feel too repetitive, does not become predominant when compared to the theme. The things that could potentially become tedious do not have the time to become so. The story remains tight, the narrative remains fun. You will have a little bit of RPG feel because people will make jokes about the character and the crazy stuff that the character is doing, or the stupid stuff that the character is doing. So it remains lively and bubbly for the duration of the game. If the game was longer, then it would probably fall apart towards the end. But this is not the case. Colt Express, absolutely fun game, very approachable, very easy to play with non-gamers and gamers alike. Is light fun, lighter than many games that hardcore gamers will play, but not completely light, not completely deprived of decisions and meaningful things that you can strategize about, especially because when it comes to committing to actions in the future, well, there definitely are decisions and important ones to make. I think it strikes a good balance between having enough of a challenge and interaction to keep you interested, and at the same time moving fast and moving in a very fluid way, because overall this still is a pretty light design. Colt Express, fun game.